Good day, everyone. Just give people a chance to settle in and start in 1 minute. Welcome, Carmen. I can see you on the queue. I'll start in about 30 seconds. Welcome, everyone. So I'm just going to say hello to Carmen, who's just joined the queue there. For those of you who aren't aware, there's a StreamYard link that's on the banner at the bottom of the screen, and also I sent a message as well on most of the channels as well with that. So I might just send you the link again, just so you have a copy of it, and just put it to your comments box so you can join the queue if you like. I can only have 10 people on the queue at the same time, but you can, I presume most people are going to watch anyway on the live stream and listen on the live stream. Okay, Carmen, I'm going to bring you in just to see how you're doing. Hi, Carmen, how are you doing?
I'm okay. How are you?
Yeah, very good. What are you hoping to get out of today, Carmen?
Well, I'm not working at the moment, so I was quite interested in the topic. I'm not that I haven't worked with Kanban that much, so I thought it will be interesting to understand a little bit more about it.
Okay. So just to be aware, I did another live stream last week where I explained about kanbanguides.org, and I went into the main guide called Kanban the Flow Strategy. Today we're going to talk about one of the addendums called Kanban for Complexity. I will briefly cover the basic guide today, but if you want to go into a bit of depth on the background, the live stream from last week would be very useful.
Oh, perfect. Thank you.
You're welcome. Also, there was another live stream as well yesterday on Monte Carlo probabilistic forecasting. So even if you're using Scrum, you might find that useful. So check that out as well.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thanks very much for joining. Carmen, do you know anything about the Cynefin framework? Have you ever heard of it?
Yes, I do. It's something I know for a while, and unfortunately, the teams I work with don't use it. I'm a researcher, so for me, I always feel that it will bring more value into projects if we were using Cynefin, because just for example, from the research perspective, the unrealistic expectations sometimes because they don't know which problem they are tackling. So I'm actually an advocating person for Cynefin.
Good. I went a bit deeper into Cynefin yesterday, but I will cover it again today. It's probably the first thing I'm going to cover. And so thank you very much for joining. What I'll do, Carmen, throughout the broadcast, I will check in with you every now and again, and whoever else is on the queue, just to see how you're doing, give you a little bit of a warning. I'll just call out your name, so I just don't wake you up, if that's all right.
Okay, no worries.
Hopefully you'll be fully alert all the way through. So thank you very much for joining. I'm just going to remove you back off the stream for now. So if you want to join, please use that link that I've sent out on the window. We're now going to look at Kanban for complexity. But first, what we need to do is we need to talk about complexity. There are two main models that I'm aware of. One of them is Ralph Stacey's model, which I'm not really going to go into so much. Going to zone in on the Cynefin framework, which has been around for quite a while now. So I'm going to keep an eye on your comments. I'm going to remove the branding from the screen so you get to see more what's actually going on, so I can kind of turn that on later on if I need to. So we'll just take the messages away, maybe just get rid of some of the banners as well. So you've got a more real estate that you can work on during this broadcast. So just hide that one as well. Okay, so just going to change my cameras over. And I'm going to go over to my flip chart, and we're going to be looking at my flip. That message should hopefully disappear shortly. Okay, cool. All right. So any questions along the way, just please put a comment on the comments box, whichever channel you're coming through on, and feel free to join. Matthew, welcome. Thank you for joining again today. Matthew, you might be a little bit bored because we're going to cover Kinevin again in this session because some people haven't covered it already, but hopefully a bit faster than yesterday. Okay, so let me get started then. So this framework has been around for a while. There's a paper on the Harvard Business Review. I believe it was one of the most read papers on the Harvard Business Review for quite a long time by Dave Snowden and a lady called Mary E. Boone. Dave Snowden is probably more famous for this framework. And the website, the blog that he uses is cognitive-edge, cognitive as in using your brain, -edge, edge.com /blog. So great place to find out more about the Kinevin framework. It means the home of our ultimate belongings, kind of like where do we all come from and the various attributes that kind of create us, what kind of religion you're from, if you have any nationality, where you were brought up, the life experiences and so on. It kind of summarizes all of the things really that kind of make our habitat or place of ultimate belonging. It's a Welsh word, and because Dave Snowden is Welsh, and it's kind of pronounced Conevin. So it's kind of the Y from an English speaking point of view is kind of like a U, and the F is kind of like a V. It's, at least that's the way I pronounce it. I hope I'm not destroying the Welsh pronunciation there. Okay, so there are 5 domains in Kinevin. There's the clear domain, which used to be called the obvious, and before that was called the simple domain, now called the clear domain. Makes it a bit easier because now we talk about the 5 C's: clear, complicated, complex, chaotic, chaos, and confused. Or there is another word as well, which you'll get to later on, so it's not quite 5 C's. So if something is clear or obvious, you just do it or buy it. And typically use best practice in that domain. And this would be the space where you know what you know, you just do it or you buy it. You don't need to bring any experts to help you. You don't need to do any analysis. You just go ahead and do it. If anybody can think of any examples from the clear domain, if they could put something on the comments window. I'm going to check in with Matthew. Matthew, are you okay with me? I hope you're okay with me bringing you on. Just check in with you. Matthew, how are you doing?
Oh, very well, thanks.
Very welcome. Long time no speak.
I know, long time. I'm never bored hearing you talk.
Good. I'm delighted. Thank you. I guess we're all trying to find something to do at the moment, aren't we? So it's
exactly.
I'm glad I'm able to keep people going at least. Yeah. You'll be back to normality hopefully sometime soon, and you won't be listening to John on a Friday afternoon anymore. I'm pretty sure of that.
I'm enjoying it at the moment and learning as well.
Good. Thank you so much, Matthew.
That's
Matthew,
right.
do you mind helping me with this here, because you were on the call yesterday as well, I believe, to do with Monte Carlo, and we were talking about the clear domain.
Sure.
So can you think of some examples from your professional life or personal life where you just do it or you buy it? It's just clear. It's obvious. Can you think of some examples?
Well, I don't say when I'm looking for resources, I know perhaps I'm looking for Ruby developer or a UX person. It's very clear what I actually need. Yeah. I go out and I put out a request for that. That's very clear.
Yeah. So you're looking for some kind of commoditized skill, if you like. So there's these skills. People have experience in this particular skill. Now, this is interesting because looking for someone with those skills might be obvious for someone who's experienced with doing that, but that very quickly could get complicated, couldn't it?
That's correct. Yeah.
Yeah. But your experience, you'd know where to go, right? You'd know where to look. You'd know which agencies are probably best for supplying. Actually, put you in touch with Ruby developers, but it could get messy very quickly, couldn't it, Matthew?
That's right. During, say, perhaps the interview process and stuff, and sieving through CVs, you might go, okay, what's the best fit for what I want, and then it gets really messy or complicated.
Yeah. So maybe initial filtering might be fairly obvious.
Obvious, yeah.
Yeah. Are there unexplained gaps in the CV? Does it look like the person's bluffing? Well, that could kind of gets up into this space, doesn't it?
That's right.
So again, it's really interesting. Is that things can get messy very quickly. A lot of things can start clear, actually, but actually, if you're not careful, you could end up over in chaos, couldn't you? What other things can you think of, Matthew? So let's leave recruitment out of it for now, because actually we'll talk about recruitment again in a minute when we talk about complexity. Can you think of other examples of things that you do, personal life or professional life, that you just do it? You don't need any help from anybody.
I would say perhaps creating sort of stories or epics within Jira.
Yeah. There's there would be some best practices around kind of writing the first cut of a story, if you like. It mightn't be the right story, but you kind of get started. You say, okay, what are the high level items that we need to deliver, and maybe it gets a bit tricky later on, but the first cut should be fairly obvious, shouldn't it?
That's right.
It depends on the context.
And perhaps say as a Scrum Master, when setting up, say, sort of rules of engagement, ways of working with a new Scrum team, we kind of know what events are required.
Yeah. So, like, for example, we should know how to run a daily Scrum at this stage, right?
Yeah.
And there are practices around that. I hope people aren't using the 3 questions. They just bore the life out of me. But people know how to do it. You know what I mean? It's like, let's walk the wall or whatever it is, or put up the board. Thank you, Matthew. Yeah. And can you think of some examples that are more complicated? Because you've already mentioned recruiting, so filtering CVs, and then maybe you're kind of interviewing people, and you might need some help from people from HR maybe as well. So the complicated domain is like the domain of experts. You either need more time to investigate, or you need some experts to help you.
So I work with sort of encryption, decryption, GDPR, and depending on the type of system that's required, we need to evaluate what encryption approach needs to be used. So depending on the system, it can get complex. We'll have to sort of triage it properly and then decide which path we need to take.
That's interesting. That's interesting, because normally triage would be in the chaotic space, believe it or not.
Well, it is. Okay.
Or it could be in the confused space where you don't know which space it's going to go in. But I think what you're saying is there's kind of a reference, depending on the system that you use a different type of encryption. Is that what you're saying?
That's correct. Yep. That's exactly.
And do you have to do some analysis to figure that out, or would that be just clear?
There'll be some analysis.
Okay. So maybe in your context, it might be different in somebody else's context, but deciding the encryption type for a system. Okay. Lovely.
But just to give you more meat on that, say the way Salesforce would handle that data is different. The way a Postgres data will handle it's different. The way it would be done in say a data lake will be different.
Okay. And would there be any situation where deciding the encryption type, even if you got some experts, wouldn't be resolved, that you'd have to get everyone in a room to figure it out? Or is this really, if you get the experts to do analysis, you get the answer? So
about 9 months ago, we were in that complex state, but now we've figured it out and moving into the complicated space.
Okay, that's really interesting, because Scrum is quite good at doing that, isn't it? You do some research to try to figure something out. You do some learning, and hopefully that brings you into the complicated spaces. You learn more. Yeah, that took quite a few sprints to figure that out. A lot. We don't want to be. We don't want to be spinning wheels forever. You know what I mean? Although maybe you do. It depends on what you're doing. But like looking for a vaccine, are the experts able to figure that out at the moment, or are they here? Are they trying to do continuous experiments? I'm not really sure. I don't know enough about that to really comment. Thank you, Matthew. Okay, I'm going to check in with you again later on, and please keep the comments coming through as well, Matthew. I really appreciate you joining again today.
Thanks a lot. Cheers.
Thank you so much. Carmen, I'm going to go back to you now. So I'm looking for some examples in the complex space. and even the complicated space, given that you've got such an interest in this area. Have you got some examples for me?
Let me think about it. So I will say a lot of the projects I work will be on the complex and complicated. For me, complex is when we don't know the problem.
Yeah.
We don't know who is having the problem, what the problem is, and how we are going to solve the problem, obviously, because we don't know anything on the problem. And that will be, I don't know, let me think of projects like we had a situation in a publisher I was working where they knew the younger generations were not engaging with the content, so they wanted to understand what we could do to get them to engage. That for me will be complex because we just know the audience, in this case, that they were targeting, but we don't understand what the problem is. And I like what you were saying. So as we started doing research, we quite quickly started realizing and making hypotheses, and then we could started moving towards a complicated, moving back and forth between complex and complicated, because we will start thinking, okay, it might be this. Let's do a prototype, let's test it, and then we will move into more of a complicated problem.
Yeah, so I would say, to top up what you're saying, I would say trying to understand the problem to solve, because we might have an assumption about the problem statement, but that is an assumption, and we need to prove or disprove whether that's actually the right problem to solve. In addition, we don't even know who we're having some guesses about who might be using this. Sometimes we come up with proto-personas or personas. We think that these characters are going to be using our solution, but actually we need some running experiments to actually verify whether that's the case. We might think certain personas suit our product, but maybe they don't. And we might also think that certain solutions might work. And so this would be a real sweet spot for Lean UX. Lean UX would be deeply in the complex space where you got a combination kind of lean startup design thinking going on there.
Yeah, we did a bit of both. Yeah, like both design thinking and lean.
Yeah. And if you were doing Scrum, what would happen is there's a Scrum at UX workshop I'm doing in a week and a half's time. And I did a talk, I did a free live stream a couple of weeks ago on it. And basically what I explained was that when you combine Scrum is normally kind of on the liminal between the complex and complicated domain. So you kind of know what your product you're building, and you have an idea what features you should be building. Yeah, you need to do some learning to figure out how to do it, or even whether it's the right thing to do. But as such, we kind of know what product we're building. Whereas when you're kind of in Lean UX, you mightn't even know what product you're building or who the customer might be. You might have some assumptions about what they should be, but until you run some experiments, you don't really know. So this is kind of interesting. So when you combine Scrum with Lean UX, what might happen is if you had a product backlog, some of these items might be experiments in your product backlog. Maybe a lot of them would be experiments in your product backlog, as opposed to we're going to deliver feature X. So you might do lots of prototyping here before you build anything, because you could waste a lot of money actually building something, build it and they will come kind of attitude. But actually here, what we try to do is maybe do some prototypes on some of those potential solutions, because maybe people don't want those solutions actually.
No, it is. We did. That's why I think complex. This is where I see problems in general as a researcher. So people go too early into start building, and if we start building, then they don't want to get out of what they're building. And maybe at the early stages, we don't really know what it needs to be built, because we even exploring. So to be honest, this project we did like before we even started prototyping, we had a couple of months of understanding what it was the problem. So that is the issue. When you have a complex problem, it's really important to set expectations of your team on why we need this, why we need to really first narrow down the problem.
Yeah, I did a talk on this a week ago with there's a thing called a truth curve. And so what you do is when you're over here, so I won't go deeply into it now, but essentially you've got evidence kind of on the vertical axis, and here you've got the level of effort you're putting in. And so what you should be doing is you should be acquiring evidence as you do put in more effort. But what happens a lot is, so this is called the truth curve. And what happens a lot is people actually have very little evidence, but they've built the whole thing. Whereas what they should have done is maybe done some fake door stuff or Wizard of Oz prototypes, things like that, a landing page. Will they even come to look at the page, you know, or is it even the right price? They might want it, but they might want it to be free. So lean UX will be very, very comfortable deep in the complex space, but also in the positive part of the chaotic domain. It's actually okay to be in chaos, because sometimes you might do things like you might do a hackathon, or I think what Google did for a while, they had this 20% time. I'm not sure if they're still doing that, where you kind of give people a little bit of freedom. It's not that risky because hackathon's usually only 24 hours, and 20% time is just like one day in the whole week. It's not like you're putting a major risk into that. So I think what you're saying, Carmen, is you do a lot of research in the complex space, and as you learn more, the work moves over into the complicated domain.
Yeah.
Do you have any examples of work in the complicated or clear domain?
The complicated will be more when once it's quite clear, the problem is clear, but we're not really sure about the solution because we need to adapt it to our specific audience. So it will, that's in general. Whereas in the projects I'm in, it's like, oh, we have a solution. Because the company, that might happen as well, happens a lot. They already have a solution. So we need to find a way of how this solution can fit for the audience we have. That could be as well.
Yeah, that's a very interesting point, because if you're, so if in the clear space is where you just do it or buy it and you just know what to do, in the complicated domain, if you get the experts together, if they do some analysis or research, they will figure out the answer. If, however, they're not figuring out the answer, that's an indication that you might need to get everybody in the room and get some diverse thinking, actually, people who might not be the experts in this space. So a lot of people say you should just get the experts to do things. But if the experts are struggling and they're going into analysis paralysis, sometimes you need to use a different strategy, get everybody in the room, and you might have people from different walks of life, actually, contributing to the solution. I was really encouraged recently by the exaptation, we call it exaptive practice in the complex domain, because what they did was they repurposed the CPAP filtration mask that's normally used for people with obstructive sleep apnea, where they blow air down your throat to kind of keep your throat open so your breath doesn't stop during the night. And they repurposed those for the COVID-19 patients so they don't have to go onto ventilators. So that's an example of using a product that was designed for something completely different in a different way. And so you can use a parallel experiments, a parallel safe to fail experiments, where basically you can afford to lose. Some of these experiments might even compete against each other, because you're actually not really sure what's going to happen, and you need to have a dampening strategy ready if one of these experiments doesn't really work. I'm a big fan of parallel experiments, because in most companies, people say the only failure is the lack of learning, but actually some executives feel embarrassed when the team fails. Oh, let's celebrate, we failed, and they don't feel like that. So, but if you had 4 experiments running and one of them kind of succeeded, you're giving them something to talk about, aren't you? And you can kind of play down the other experiments that hopefully they're small enough that they don't hurt us anyway. Okay, thank you very much for joining, Carmen. I'll check in with you again later on. Thank you so much. So really interesting, right? So when you're in the clear domain or complicated domain, this is essentially order. So you can effectively come up with some kind of a plan to do this kind of work. It is basically plannable. When you're in the left-hand side, on the right-hand side, we had known knowns. In the clear domain, we had known unknowns. In the complicated domain, we knew what we didn't know. But we got the experts together. We spent more time analyzing. We got to the answer. But if you're going into analysis paralysis, an indication that you might need to go a bit deeper into complexity, get more people in a room to try and figure out what the solution is, and do some empiricism, go into some kind of learning loop, so that you basically learn. So here you go from known knowns to unknown unknowns. You don't know what you don't know. So when people look for predictable plans for complex work. It's like, really? I mean, this is predictable. This is kind of less predictable, but over this side is kind of pretty much unpredictable. It's very difficult to plan in this space. So although I did talk about Monte Carlo probabilistic forecasting yesterday, I did talk about some health warnings when you use tools like that as well, particularly over in this side of the Kanban framework. So Scrum was kind of happy in this space because it's using an empirical loop: plan, do, check out, build, measure, learn, pick your poison. Something that kind of goes into some kind of a learning loop will work well in this space, particularly on some kind of a rhythm. In the chaotic space, there really are no constraints. You can just, you just kind of relax constraints for 24 hours or 1 day a week or whatever. And people, sometimes might even do it for a few weeks too. But it needs to be an amount of time that you can afford to lose out on. But there's also a negative type of chaos, and that's why I've got the RIP sign here and the kind of the cross symbol here of somebody's after dying. Because if you get a bit too cocky, a bit too arrogant, thinking everything is obvious and you use best practice on it, you just fall over the cliff. It's actually, that's why it's so red and so deep there. It's a cliff. And so when you go into that space, you just need to do something. And you'll see me acting very differently depending on the domain. And by the way, I don't classify things like COVID-19 as in any particular space. There's different aspects of that whole problem that could be in different areas. Washing your hands is now clear, thankfully. The experts working the numbers every day, probably a bit complicated. You need to bring experts to bear. Figuring out the vaccines, different opinions on that. I don't know, is it deeply complex? I think what Bill Gates is doing is kind of deeply complex, because he's got 7 labs running in parallel, I think, trying to figure things out. But the people who kind of know a bit more, they're kind of, as they learn stuff, they're bringing more work into the complicated domains. So I think the antigen test now, they figure that out here. A few weeks ago when the lockdown started, that was just an example of doing something. And really what you normally do with a problem is you start off in the middle, which is the confused space, not knowing which one of these spaces that you're in. So you assume you're here, and well, if you might even be aware of these. And the problem is, there's a lady I was coaching last year, and she was using the kind of practice that's more appropriate for complex, or she was using that in every domain. So I got feedback that she was not technical enough, and being technical, having technical expertise, that's like the domain of experts on the right hand side. But what she was doing, she's bringing everybody in the room for every problem, and maybe 2 people in the room could have fixed it. That you didn't need to bring everybody in the room. Equally, you could be a technical expert. You might think if you just had more time to help, you got more experts to help you, or if you could just change the process, everything will be resolved. Or over here, if you just act like a dictator, everyone do what I say, everything will be fine. If you're confused, you'll do what you always did, kind of thing. So it's an okay starting point, but you should then, even chaos can be an okay starting point from a triage point of view. But it's important to try to use the thinking that's appropriate for the domain of the problem that you're in. So depending on what problem you have, you should use a different approach. Do it by it. Support a self-organizing team of experts, trust them to get the job done. Maybe some large group facilitation, collaboration. Maybe get some cognitive diversity in here to mix up the thinking. And maybe here, if it's negative chaos, you might want to be a little bit of a benevolent dictator. If it's more the positive type chaos, it's okay. You're just kind of giving them a bit of space, backstage leadership. Let them see what they come up with. Trust them to come up with something, and then just try and put the constraints back on so that they come back up into the complex domain where they go back into their sprinting again. So the so what from this is, on the right hand side, this is ordered. On the left hand side, this is unordered. So basically plannable, essentially unplannable. You can do kind of forecasts and all that kind of cool stuff, but it's lots of health warnings go along with that. And operatic, that's a new addition to the in recent weeks to the framework, is where you stand back and reflect. Sometimes it's good to just step back and just reflect what the hell's going on here, and just start doing some thinking about what's the right thing to do next, rather than getting stuck in the hamster wheel about having to do something in the chaotic space, you definitely need to act and do something now. But sometimes you need, if you're even in the complex space, you need to kind of step back a little bit and say, what's the right thing to be doing here? Or should we be running 4 experiments in parallel? Should it be 5? Should we have competing experiments? Should we apologize to the experts because actually the experts are right and we don't need to be in here? We should be over here. So this kind of means a reflective time. So I'm just going to check in with Matthew first and then Carmen, and checking the comments as well to see if you've got any questions on that. Matthew, any questions so far?
Hey, yeah, I did have one. I placed it in the chat, but 2 seconds later you answered it.
Okay, cool. Thank you. That's perfect.
Yeah.
Good stuff. Thank you. And Carmen, any questions from you?
No, that all makes sense. It's pretty much as I saw Canadian. So yeah, thank you for that.
I'm not really happy with the way I've explained it today. I think I did a better job of explaining it yesterday and in previous days, but I hope you got the idea. It's not meant to be a thorough explanation of Caneva. You actually need to go on a 1, 2, or 5 day course really to go really into a lot of depth with this. And I recommend if you really want to learn more about this, go to cognitive-edge.com, and they have some online learning that you can do over a number of months at your own pace, I believe. We can watch recordings and so on. So check that out as well.
Perfect. Thank you.
It's quite good value as well, considering the knowledge that went into it. Thank you very much, Carmen. Okay. So I'm going to go back now. So first of all, we talked about complexity. So Kanban for complexity, I needed to explain what complexity was. Now what I think I need to do is I need to go back to the framework that I talked about last week, because Kanban for complexity is actually based upon Kanban, the flow strategy. To go into this in depth, I did, I think I did nearly 2 hours on this last week. I'm only going to spend less than 30 minutes on it this week, hopefully even shorter. So Kanban, the flow strategy is just a very simple guide that I put together with Daniel Vacanti last year. And it's to focus on transparency, visualization, flow, and learning. I was getting a bit fed up of going on buildings and seeing so-called Kanban boards with no work in progress limits and blocked columns and things like that. So people were doing visualization all right, but they weren't really working on transparency, whereas they were blocked, the flow, getting work through the system, and learning feedback loops. I didn't really see much of that. And to use Kanban, the flow strategy, you must be willing to actively manage work in progress, which means that when you've got work in the system, essentially when you start a piece of work, you're actually committing to finish it. So if you committed to finish it, just finish it. But what I see a lot is people, you can use all sorts of rules. This item is more important than that one, blah blah blah, da 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 da. But then what people do is once the work is in progress, they get somewhere to leapfrog other work, and what that does is it causes some work in progress to age, and it affects your flow. So I'll talk more about that later. And you use workflow policies to support your flow. So what are our rules for which work comes out of the backlog that goes into selected, for example, if that was the first state of your workflow. What's our move policy? So if we've got 5 items in progress and there's only 2 of us, which items do we move today? So actually by writing these down, it's really cool, because Edgar Schein says, he says culture is the set of shared assumptions, written and unwritten. And what I love about workflow policies is whatever assumptions we have, we're writing them down. So they're written on a wall. So, okay, so that's how we decide. And it also reduces the debate a little bit as well every day. And also we need to avoid a thing called local optimization. So local optimization is where, let's say you've got 5 teams on a product, and you're getting every team to work as fast as possible, and they're all working as fast as possible, but actually we're getting no product out the door because they're not really working together. We're not optimizing the system, we're just optimizing for the team, for locally. And if someone was to ask me what is Kanban the flow strategy, it's a strategy for optimizing the flow of value through a process that uses a work in progress optimized pull system. And you can find this at kanbanguides.org. You heard of scrumguides.org, so there's kanbanguides.org. And we use the word optimized rather than limited. I learned that from Andy Carmichael a few years ago, that if you reduce the work in progress too low, you can starve the system. And so it's, trying to find the sweet spot. So you're trying to optimize the work in progress. Okay, keeping an eye on your comments. Thank you very much. And so the central piece of Kanban, the flow strategy, is you've got a workflow. And this is a very simple one. I don't like showing workflows. So people think, oh, is this what a Kanban board is supposed to look like? Is this the design? No. Particular workflow that happens to have a backlog on it. You don't have to have a backlog on your workflow. And the backlog, by the way, is not necessarily ordered. You probably notice one thing on the backlog. You'll see some of them have ones and then TB and NW. So what that means is really encouraging what Vasco Duarte and a lot of the no estimates people promote right sizing, basically. So an item either fits in terms of our service level expectation, which I'll explain shortly, or it's too big, or no way. So if it's too big or no way, you need to break it down. We don't worry about, is it 1 story point, 3 story point. We don't even bother with story points in Kanban the flow strategy. In Kanban the flow strategy, each work item it's mandatory to have what date did it start and what date did it finish. What date did it start? And in this case, I'm showing additional dates. So this item here was selected on the 1st of April. It didn't go into in progress 1 yet. This one started on the 12th of March. And you're supposed to have a policy. So what policy do we have for replenishment, which is from backlog into the in progress piece of the system, or commit to finish? And then the pull policy is, what if I have 3 items in progress and I'm only 1 person, which item do I move today? And so in this particular workflow, there's we don't mean to be redefining terminology. So what we did at the very back of the guide, we have definitions. And we're not saying that our definitions are the Bible or anything like that, or whatever religion you're into or not. We're not saying these are the definitions. We're just saying these are the definitions we're using in this guide. And so you can have a number of cycle times. People have different definitions. We define what we mean by that. And essentially, you can pick any start point and any end point. So you can have the red one going from here to here. The blue goes from here to here. The green one goes from there to there. So you could have 3 start points, 3 end points, and 3 different types of cycle time. And also what you'll notice is there's an infinity width limit on the backlog. There's no limit on the items in the backlog. Probably not a good policy. Probably should be maxed out at 100 for many teams. And here we got a limit of 2, virtual limit. Virtual means we're just putting a denotation at the top of the column that column should only have 2 items in there. That's just a policy. That's not a work item. And this one, for in progress 1 should have 1 item in there, and progress 2 should have 2 items in there. What I noticed though is that most people ignore these virtual limits. So what I really like about using a physical board is you can actually you can draw lines, can't you? You can painter's tape, you just draw some lines. And so in this particular case, if I want to bring another item in, it's like, oh, I've got nowhere to put it. So it's kind of slows you down. It's like, you probably notice in a lot of electronic tools, the tools still allow you to drag the item, and then the column goes red, but you can still drag the item in. So I guess you can still bring an item in here too, but it's kind of makes it a bit more awkward, I think. The in progress 1 here as well, you can see I've done 1 painter's tape line here and 2 here, so we're kind of reinforcing that. And you can see as well at the end, you've got these items are done. And there's a date. When did it go into selected? When did it go into in progress 1? When did it go into in progress 2? When did it go into done? And there's also a policy for how do you know that the first in progress date is done? So it's kind of like definition of done for the column. So it's like the checklist, So this item can't go that way unless it's met all of those criteria. So generally speaking, the work items will go. Basically the travel to the right of the system. It would be exceptional for an item to move backwards. There's only 2 reasons really, more oversimplifying now. One of them would be, let's say this item is in progress 2, but actually it never met the exit criteria of in progress 1. So we moved it too early. So, you know, then maybe we should move it back. And that would be one example. Another example would be an item came in, it should never have come in the first place. It should never have been started. But what we prefer is that you take that item to done and then you mark it as cancelled so that we don't mess up with the stats, because when you take items out of the system, it just screws up the metrics in the system. In addition to that, there's all sorts of charts, the optional charts. Here I've got the cycle time chart for the green workflow, so from here to here. And cycle time is on the vertical axis, elapsed time is on the horizontal axis. And I can see here that on roughly early April, an item landed that had a cycle time of 26. And by the way, the cycle time is the difference in the days plus 1. Because if you start something today and finish it today, the cycle time isn't 0, you add 1 to it. Yeah, it's calendar days. We don't care about weekends, it's calendar days. So this is 26, and it looks here like 2 of them here at 7. So, you know, at first look, I mean, it looks okay. I mean, I'm not happy with the 26, but maybe we seem to have fixed our problem. We seem to be doing okay. But actually, if you look at a very important chart at your daily meeting every day, if you do have daily meetings, you can also look at the work item aging chart, because if you look at the work in the system, and this was a week ago, so it's even worse than this now. I should have redrawn this. But 3 of these items came in very late. So these items we committed to the customer on the 1st of April that we want to do this, but we committed to this one on the 12th of March. Hasn't even moved into in progress 1. And there's another item here in progress 1, went in to selected 1st of March, went into here on the 2nd of March. But no, what date in April is it now? I mean, it's quite old, right? So what you can do is you can plot per column selected in progress 1 and progress 2, how old are the items in the system. And you don't need to be a genius to figure out that eventually when these guys land, they'll cause really bad cycle times. And so we're now messing. So by letting items age in our system, we're really messing with our cycle times and we're upsetting our flow. Another thing I mentioned earlier is it's important, it's mandatory basically in Kanban flows to have a service level expectation. The key word is expectation. It's not an agreement. And so last week, I think it was when I did the live stream for this, I did a rough guess at the time that there was an 85% chance if an item came in to select it, it would be finished in 40 days or less. Now I might change it to 50 days because a week and a half has passed since we did that live stream. Normally, you would inform your service level expectation based on the data. So normally what you do is if you had lots of data points on your scatter plot, kind of dotted all over the scatter plot, what you do is you just draw a ruler up. And when 85% of the dots are below that, you say, well, that's your 85th percentile. 50% of the dots is your 50th percentile. So 50 percentile would be, 50% of the cycle times are under that's kind of like the average, if you like. Whereas 85th percentile seems to be an inflection point around about 85%. You could go 95% if you want to, but there's usually a big difference between 85 and 95%. And so what you do use that for is, if I start a new item, the service expectation, why do you do that? Whether you use it based on data from the cycle time scatter plot, or in this case where the team has just really got going, you start off with a kind of a rough guess of what you think it is, and then you let the data inform you what it actually is. And then that helps you, because when you're doing some work and someone says, well, I want you to start this item, and as long as we're not kind of letting all that other work rot, and as long as we're not breaching the limits, when you bring an item in, you'd be saying, okay, well, it's probably going to take 40 days. So when you're setting expectations with people, so that's really, really interesting as well. So this is an example of a workflow. Please do not be constrained by this design. It is a design. You might have something much fancier than this. The only limit is your imagination. In fact, there's an addendum to Kanban the flow strategy where it talks about all sorts of policies that you could use, all sorts of different examples. The one thing I'd say that is really, really crucial, if you're an agile coach or a Scrum Master or some kind of agile practitioner, lean agile practitioner, you might be very tempted to design the perfect workflow for your team. And I've done it, and it's not really that smart, because what happens is the team doesn't own the board. You design the board. It might be a beautiful, beautiful board, but the team doesn't own it, and then they don't care about what's on the board, and it really sucks. So it's better to go with a workflow that's suboptimal that the team owns, and then hopefully through some kind of feedback loops, you'll eventually improve your workflow and get to a place where things are looking really, really good. I'm just going to want to check in on the comments there and just see. I don't see any major comments so far. I'm going to check in with Carmen first and then with Matthew, see if there are any questions so far. Carmen, any questions from you so far?
No, it makes sense. It's just like the companies I work, well, they use Scrum and they don't even use Scrum properly. So it's mostly people not using things in the way that they intended, but I like the flow and I really like what you said there.
Thank you. And by the way, when you add Kanban to Scrum, there's a separate guide, which I'm not covering today. I did cover it last week. It's called the Kanban Guide for Scrum Teams. It's from scrum.org. And so there is a defined way where you can complement your Scrum with Kanban, but that's not really what I'm talking about today. Here, what I'm talking about is you're not even using Scrum. You're a team and you're using Kanban. But we'll make it a bit more advanced later on, because what you'll see later on looks remarkably like Scrum. So we'll touch on that later. So thank you for that comment.
I'm interested though I have a friend who told me that Kanban is much more, well, she has been working with a team working in Kanban. So that's why I was more interested in understanding how Kanban. In Scrum, I know how it works, but not necessarily a fan necessarily for what I do. But I see why I still like this better.
Yeah, and you have to be careful as well, because it's not really about what we prefer; it's what the team prefers, isn't it? And Kanban can be really good. Yeah, it can be fantastic. You just need to make sure that the team is really bought into it, because with Kanban, the flow strategy, you have to have whip limits of some type, whether they're direct or indirect, and you also have to have start dates and end dates on all of your cards, and you have to have a service level expectation. So one of the reasons we created this guide is we wanted to make it clear what Kanban was, just make it really clear what it's really about.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, cool. Thank you. I'm going to check in with Matthew now. Matthew, how are you doing?
Oh, very well so far. That's crystal clear, no issues at all.
Good. It's really simple, isn't it, Matthew?
Yeah, it's almost common sense, but complex.
Yeah.
Once you get the hang of it, it just flows through.
Yeah, it just takes a bit. You can run some simulations to get used to it. There's some really good simulations out there. Get Kanban is one of them. I do a version of Feature Band. There's Mike Burrows' original Feature Band. There's Twig as well from Klaus Leopold. There's lots of simulations out there. And so what I do with a team, Matthew, is if I'm trying to figure out what's right for a team, I might say, maybe do you want to try a simulation, just see what you think? And so they kind of play around with it. And then if they like it.
I did a team Feature Band with you the other day.
Oh, good. Oh, yeah, good.
I was in the background, just lurking.
Oh, okay, cool. Yeah.
It was brilliant. Absolutely brilliant.
Oh, good.
If anyone hasn't done it, they should check it out.
Thank you so much. I was kind of cringing a little bit after some of it, but it's okay. I learned a bit anyway for the next time. But I'm glad you enjoyed it, and thank you so much.
Yeah, it pushed me to go look at Change Band. It was brilliant.
Yeah. Mike Burrows he's a genius. He's really good. We're delighted to have all these wonderful people being so generous with their Creative Commons content. So thank you, Matthew. I'll check in.
Yeah.
Say that again.
Your Feature Band simulation was very good. I wish I did participate physically.
I will do it again. So if people want to join that, there'll be a better version of that probably in 2-3 weeks' time. Because I've learned a few things about how to do it better the next time. And hopefully make it faster as well. Thank you, Matthew. I'll check in with you again later. Thank you so much.
Cool.
Okay. So all I'm doing at the moment is I covered complexity so far. We are through the Kinevin sense-making framework. I'm walking through the basic guide, which is Kanban, the flow strategy. Just a few other things I wanted to make you aware of. There are some practices. So the practices are, you need to define and visualize your workflow. So a lot of the time, like I was saying there to Matthew a while ago, I might run a simulation with a team, and then they say, well, we need a Kanban board. I say, okay, well, what I asked them to do is a kind of a design competition. So they kind of compete to come up with the best board design. And usually what happens is we end up with, it doesn't end up like a Frankenstein, so don't be worried about this. They usually kind of merge their ideas, and then they own their workflow. So that's the first thing, defining your workflow, which is basically the Kanban board. Workflow is the the visualization of your flow and so on. And then actively manage your work in progress. So don't let stuff rot in your in progress column. Be careful about stuff that you started that you're not finishing. When you select an item, you're telling a customer you're going to finish it, so just finish it. Because actually, we don't know really how valuable something is until we get feedback from a customer. We might think something's worth 10 million, but actually we have no idea until we get feedback. We're just guessing. So we need to get outside the building a lot. So actively manage your WIP, try to get stuff through the system so we get feedback as quickly as possible. And then, of course, try to review and improve your definition of workflow. The workflow includes like your policies, which includes work in progress limits, your columns. I'm not a big fan of swim lanes. I talk about that more in the addendum of the first addendum of Kanban, the flow strategy. I actually get very nervous when I see really tidy Kanban boards. It makes me really nervous because particularly when they're using swim lanes, because there is one good type of swim lane that I've seen, but generally speaking, what happens is people don't collaborate across swim lanes. So it looks very tidy, but people aren't collaborating on their works, and so that's something that I worry about. I mentioned already that there's definitions at the back of the guide as well. What does value mean? What is a backlog? What's a funnel? There's an optional thing called a funnel. It's like the backlog for the backlog. Cycle time, all these other things, throughput and so on, are all defined in the guide, at least for the guide. And just digging a bit deeper into actively managing work in progress, you need to find the sweet spot for what your limit is. A lot of Kanban practitioners would say between 1 and 2 items per person, although we don't have per person WIP limits. In fact, if you're using personal WIP limits, we don't call that Kanban and Kanban the flow strategy, because you're not going to collaborate with your colleagues and you've just got personal WIP limits, and usually people are breaching them anyway. I had a team last year and they all had personal WIP limits. And I said, okay, are you within your limit? And to a person, they were all breaching their limit by 1, and 2 people didn't even have any limit. So actually they had no limit. It's just a joke. So be careful about thinking, oh yeah, we'll start with personal WIP limits and then we'll go. No. Just go straight for limiting your work in progress. Pick a number. I find in practice 2/3 of the number of people on the team. You're gonna have people idle? Let's see. Let's try it. Just see how you get on. Or you can just do something very simple, what Don Reinerson does. Daniel Darwin told me about this last week. And just half the number, if you've got 20 items in the system, set your WIP limit as 10. Just half the items, and then see how you get on with that. So you just start with a number and then let the charts inform you how you're actually doing. And then that should hopefully increase your focus, your commitment, your collaboration. So we're focusing on getting work finished instead of starting work. So stop starting, start finishing. And of course, try to respond quickly to any aged items or blocked items. In addition to that, you need to balance the flow. So when work goes out of the system, you're probably going to bring work into the system. That's only if you have a situation where you don't, number one, the system isn't already clogged, like a really bad toilet. Sorry for that metaphor, but you'll remember it. So if the system isn't already clogged, if it's clogged, you're not going to bring your work in, I would hope. Also, you could have a situation where you've got a number of in-progress columns, but one of those in-progress columns is actually a constraint. It's the slowest part of the system. We can't go any faster than that. It's usually the column that is the slowest cycle time. And in that case, just bringing work in when the constraint is blocked is not a good strategy. So in the first addendum for this guide, we have some additional content annotated to the authors of TameFlow, Daniel Daron and Steve Tendon. And so if you do have a constraint in your system, first addendum deals with that, and it only touches on it. Then you really need to look at the TameFlow books. There's a brand new book on TameFlow, Tame Your Workflow, so check that out. But as such, what you do is you don't bring work in until you get work finished as such, right? So you try to balance your flow. I'm oversimplifying there. And also you need to watch any items that are aging in your system. So if you have a service level expectation of 85%, you finish something in 40 days or less, and you got something that's kind of heading towards like 35 days, why aren't you swarming on that? You know, because we're trying to set expectations to customers, and it's not an agreement or anything, but you should be watching stuff that's aging. And then the fifth practice is unblocking work. And I think actually in retrospect, if I was to rewrite this, there will be another update soon. Maybe this should have been the first thing. The first thing you probably should do is unblock work. We need to be fixing problems, don't we? Okay, so some of the basic measures then. So the basic measures are work in progress, how much work is in the system. So it depends on where your workflow starts and ends, right? But normally it's like when you commit to the customer, it's a selected column, or if it was Scrum, we sprint backlog, but I'm not trying to cover Scrum here because there's already a Kanban guide for Scrum teams. Throughput is how many items you're getting to done, or whatever the last step of your process is. And work item age, how old are the items in the system, and cycle time is how long is it taking to get from the start of your workflow to the end of the workflow, or the start point and end point, rather, to be more specific. Again, we're not trying to redefine language. We're just, this is just our way. So we say when we talk about cycle time, this is what we mean. We're not saying everybody else is wrong or anything like that. Quite the contrary. So that is just a revision of Kanban, the flow strategy. And there are some optional addendums. The first one deals with implementation details, talks more about time flow, which is Kanban with theory of constraints and throughput accounting. It talks about scaling, like with Nexus and with large scale Scrum, even though this is Kanban. I've made it compatible with these to the best extent possible, and also with Scrum.org's evidence-based management. The second addendum is what we're going to talk about next, which is Kanban for Complexity, or Kanplexity for short. So we're going to delve more into Kanban for Complexity in the next piece. Just a quick comment: Kanban, the flow strategy. I won't say it supports flight levels, but it doesn't not support flight levels. Equally for time flow and Nexus less, I guess, because these are bodies of knowledge in their own, aren't they? They're kind of, there's much more content, so we can't say we cover all of it. We're doing our best to say, you know what, if you have a company and you got Kanban in your company, you want to teach them Kanban, you could teach them Kanban, the flow strategy, as a very basic minimal guide. And then if you want to upgrade to flight levels or to time flow or whatever, you go there. I did a very bad joke at ace.works, /blog. And the joke was about all the different Kanbans went into a bar. You often hear three, whatever, went into a bar. So all the Kanbans went into the bar. Really bad joke. And I was kind of self-deprecating for the Kanban, the flow strategy, because it doesn't have any values and doesn't have any principles. So have a look at that if you want a bit of a giggle. Okay, so that is Kanban, the flow strategy. And so now what we're going to talk about next is Kanban for Complexity. So I'm just going to move the paper here. Sorry for all the paper noise. So now we're going to go into Kanban for Complexity. We've talked about the Kanban framework. And one of the things about the Kanban framework is that waterfall is probably okay in the clear domain. You might even get away with it to an extent in the complicated domain. Kanban's very comfortable in the complicated domain. So is Scrum. Kanban's actually quite good as well with triaging things in the chaotic domain. Gets a bit tricky in the complex domain, because you need some kind of an empirical loop. And Kanban, the flow strategy, doesn't have any sprints. So it's Kanban, the flow strategy is more comfortable over here. It's not really comfortable over here. So in order to have a version of Kanban that people could use in the Kanban space, I had a team in end of 2018, early 2019. They were doing complex work. Their cycle time was 120 days, so they couldn't use Scrum, and it wasn't software, although Scrum can be used for non-software now. They were doing complex work, and also their belief system was more in tune with Kanban than Scrum. So we talked earlier about, teams should really pick their own method, and I'll try to support them as best I can. And in this case, they really needed Kanban, but they were in the space. And what I was worried about was, yes, you can get a very skilled practitioner to help you, to operate in the complex space. But what I was worried about, what happens when I leave the building? And if there isn't another person with that experience in Kanban in the building, what are they going to do? And are they going to just go back to Scrum or something? And then Scrum is fine, but if their cycle time's 120 days, they're just going to fake Scrum, and that's not good for Scrum either, right? So the problem that I had was we needed to be in this space, but we needed Kanban. So I'm going to delve into that next, and I'm just going to check in with Karen and Matthew again to see if you got any more questions. Matthew, how are you doing so far?
Hi, just a quick one. So
Yeah.
the Kanban you just explained, right? Are you advocating that time boxed?
No, it's optional. You don't need to have sprint. Yeah, there's not even a daily meeting in Kanban, the flow strategy. That's even optional. Yeah. It doesn't have any roles either. It doesn't say there's no it's not Scrum anyway. There'll be no Scrum man. There's no equivalent of a product owner. It does have a backlog, but it's just for a team. It helps the team to manage their work. So when you're looking at Kanban, the flow strategy, look at what it's not saying.
Okay.
You know what I mean? Because a lot of people think, backlog probably should be ordered. Well, no, it's actually not necessarily ordered. I did spell that out in the guide just in case people kind of made a mistake with that. Yeah. So that's what we will have, what you're looking for in Kanban for complexity, because that's kind of where we're going, right?
Okay.
Because essentially, if you're going to be in the complex space, you do need some rhythm.
Right.
So how are you going to get that? So what I did basically was I married Kanban, the flow strategy, with Cynefin, heavily attributed to Dave Snowden and Cognitive Edge, because that's their content. I can't take any credit for Cynefin. That's a wonderful piece of work from Dave Snowden and Cognitive Edge. But what I did was I just tried to write a guide where people could use complexity thinking in a Kanban environment.
Thanks.
Okay, Matthew, thank you. I'm going to check in now with Carmen. Anybody else wants to join as well, you can do so. Just send me a message on the comments. Carmen, any questions so far?
No, it's all clear.
Good. So we've talked about Cynefin, and we've talked about Kanban, the flow strategy. So that's like your introduction. So now we're going to talk about Kanban for complexity. Okay. So we've already talked about Cynefin, so I'm not going to explain this. And this is Dave Snowden's work. I'm not claiming it's Dave's work. Fantastic, Dave. Thank you so much for giving us the Cynefin sense-making framework. Absolutely fantastic. What I've tried to do here is try to explain what's the essence of Kanban, the flow strategy. So essentially, it's about small, self-managing, cross-discipline, cross-functional teams, learning empirically, frequently, and respectfully from customers, end users, and stakeholders. You often hear people saying they've got cross-functional teams, but actually what they have is cross-discipline teams within a function. So they kind of miss the trick that they don't have the collaboration between functions. So that's why I'm kind of being explicit about cross-discipline and cross-functional. They work in fast feedback loops, and they're governed in rhythmic cycles. I think the battle for what you call those is kind of over. I personally don't like the word sprint. If you want to call them sprint, I'm not going to complain. What I don't like about sprint is you're kind of going very fast, and sometimes it's a marathon, right? So, but the battle is over. Let's people understand. So it's a rhythmic cycle, which is a lot of people think of as a sprint. It has 5 events, and it has a direction of travel. So in Scrum, there's a vision for the product. It's not so obvious in the Scrum guide, but it does use the word vision, and the word goals is mentioned as well. So there's a direction of travel, and that direction of travel has 3 time horizons. So I start off with what I call Mars, which is 5+ years, almost impossible perfection vision. And then I have the moon. You see, I like the planets and so on. So the moon is 1 to 3 years kind of thing. And then I have getting into orbit, which is like your target. So kind of there's some aspects of Toyota Cat in here as well. So like 3 to 6 month kind of target condition. So I call that going to orbit and so on. I'll show you a drawing of that in a minute. So instead of having a sprint goal, because sprint goal, I'm a Scrum trainer, and I do teach that Scrum goals are a very good idea. In fact, they're mandatory in Scrum. You should do them. They're de-emphasized in large-scale Scrum to an extent because of practical concerns with many teams and one product and so on. But in single team Scrum, the sprint goal is mandatory. In Kanban for Complexity, there is no sprint goal, but there's a direction of travel. So I would hope that the team is still aiming for some kind of target in 3 to 6 months. So if we don't have some kind of target, it's well, what's it? Yogi Berra said, if you don't know where you're going, you end up somewhere else or something. I can't remember the exact saying. So you give some people to aim for. So there's an aspect of, okay, so where are we? So what and know what? So what are we going to do next? And people struggle with time horizons. So rather than give a direction of travel and say, here's the Elon Musk version, 5+ years, almost impossible perfection vision, will land a rocket anywhere on Earth within 1 hour. And, it's almost impossible. You probably will do it, but it's like 5+ years away. Other people, financial people, typically project program people, product management people, tend to be thinking about what can I do in the next year? And then the people on the team are probably more concerned about, well, what can we do in the next 3 to 6 months? So that's an interesting distinction here at Kanban for Complexity. We use a direction of travel rather than the idea of a goal for the rhythmic cycle. There's only 2 roles. The roles are team and servant. And I'm not sure if you're familiar with Patrick Lencioni's work. He's got a book called The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team. And so essentially we talk about avoiding the 5 dysfunctions of the team. So while Kanban, the flow strategy, doesn't have any values, I guess the antithesis of these dysfunctions is as close as we get to values in Kanban for Complexity, because we need to start with trust and basically make sure that the team is a fully functioning team. If you want to know more about the 5 dysfunctions of a team, there's a fabulous podcast called the Tablegroup. Tablegroup.com, I think. Patrick Lencioni. It's the only podcast where I listen to every single episode. I absolutely love it. And since the pandemic crisis began, they're also doing free webinars, I believe. So check them out. Really, really cool. So only 2 roles, team and servant. Okay. Just checking the comments there. So far, so good. And just moving on. The team needs to be diverse. So this is a hat tip to Matthew Syed. I'm not sure if any of you heard of Matthew Syed. He wrote a book called Black Box Thinking. And he wrote another book in 2019 called Rebel Ideas. And this is a hat tip to him, actually. So what you need is, particularly when you're in the complex space, you might need a diverse team. So actually using a set of experts, that's very good thinking for the complicated domain. But when you're in the complex domain, you need people that are not just diverse in terms of diversity and inclusion, but also in terms of how they thinking differently to avoid groupthink. There needs to be workflow policy. So in the team, one of the concerns with having no roles in the team is that if everybody's responsible, nobody's responsible. So what I did there was I said, okay, in the team, you need to be specific. You need to have a policy saying who's doing what. And it's not like, Matthew's doing one thing, Carmen's doing something else, I'm doing something else. It's more about, okay, 2 of us are worried about articulating the direction of travel and engaging stakeholders. Another 2 of us are worried about the forecasting and setting expectations with customers and end users. Another 2 people may be interested in the leading on the product backlog or refinement activities. If you do refinement in your team, it tends to be right sizing when we use Kanban. Is it small enough to fit within our service level expectation? So you can have a set of policies in your team, so we're all clear. It's not like a racing matrix or anything. It's not intended to be like that. We do want fuzziness. We're just trying to avoid, if everybody's responsible, no one's responsible. So there's something written down, so we're all clear. Who's worried about what? Let's put it that way. And then the servant. Some examples of the servant. Kind of hints here of servant leadership. So it could be a change agent, could be a coach, a product manager, a manager, a mentor, a leader, an executive. Some of the things that I look for is they need to have a good moral compass. I learned from a very experienced person that particularly when people's lives are at risk, they need to be technically minded because they don't know what they don't know. So if they're sitting on top of risk and they're not even aware of those risks, that's risky, obviously. So that's an important thing. they need to fix problems. So we see lots of leaders and they're aware of the problems, but are they fixing them? So here, make it really clear, you need to be fixing problems, you need to make constructive interventions and not punish people for making mistakes. Although I don't put it in that way, because if I say, don't walk on the wet grass or don't touch the wet paint, that's exactly what you do. So I probably need to reword how I did that there. I'm just going to check in with Carmen and see any questions so far. Sorry, Carmen, you were on all along. I forgot to turn you off. Any questions so far?
I was just wondering, like, when you were talking about the direction of travel, I guess in a complex and even in some instances in a complicated problem, as learn things as you move forward, and business might learn new things as well, and they might change their perspective, or you learn about constraints. So I guess you need to keep adapting.
Absolutely.
Is that the case?
Absolutely. So in the guide itself, I used an example of going to Mars, but you might have to pivot to go subsurface in the ocean. It could be a huge pivot, actually. So one of the things about complexity in particular is we're not really zoned in on going in a particular direction for sure. We know that direction of travel will evolve based on what we're learning. And sometimes it's going to be a huge pivot by necessity. Okay. Thank you, Carmen. All right, so so far so good. And then in terms of the servant, some of the expectations of things that they should be doing, they need to make sure there's an organizational sense of purpose. So it's not just about making money from customers, it's also about society, what damage you're doing to society. Then there's particular types of behavior that we expect. So for example, you often hear go see from Lean, so really go see, really see what's actually happening. From a systems point of view, they need to avoid local optimization. And what I worry about at the moment with the supply of PPE equipment and the pandemic crisis is I think what we're seeing is the bullwhip effect. It's like a tiny variation in demand is causing huge oscillations down the chain. Except with the COVID-19, there's huge variations in demand, which is probably causing even much bigger, much more massive effects, bullwhip effects. I'm really worried about the lack of joined up thinking with PPE across the countries. They all seem to be competing against each other, and even in the United States, the states seem to be competing with each other as well. So from a product or service point of view, this servant is going to be trying to avoid that kind of effect within our team of teams, that basically teams are working together to make sure that we're delivering value and we're avoiding blips in our flow. They're trying to work on designing the organization for the customer, and they would need to have large group facilitation skills, like for example open space or liberating structures. One of the annoying things about Kanban for complexity is I've just opened more doors for you. So if you want to check out liberating structures, go to liberatingstructures.com, and there's plenty of books as well on open space. Okay, so I'm going to check in with Matthew now before I go to the drawing of Kanban for complexity. Matthew, how are you doing so far?
Thanks, John. Just one question or a couple of questions interwoven. So back to the direction of travel. It seems like you've got a slightly longer time frame or rhythm.
Yes.
Would that be right?
That's correct. That's absolutely correct.
Okay. So if that's the case with the lean startup and say lean UX, where we do experiments and hypotheses and stuff, how do you shorten that life cycle to something smaller than 3 to 6 months that we're kind of proposing?
Okay, so one thing I forgot to
or 3 years or something.
Yeah, so one thing, thank you very much for that. So one thing I forgot to explain is that this rhythmic cycle, this sprint, is 1 to 4 weeks long.
Okay. Okay.
It's like a Scrum sprint.
Okay.
And if you notice the diagram here as well, like Scrum, I normally draw kind of a star, except I got feedback that it looks like Patrick from SpongeBob SquarePants when I draw a star. And so at Scrum, you'd normally have a kind of a vision, wouldn't you? And then within the sprint, it'd be kind of a smaller version of that, which would be like the sprint goal, kind of iterating towards that vision kind of thing, yeah?
Okay.
if you're doing Scrum well, that's what you'd be doing. I'm doing a product owner class tomorrow, and that's kind of one of the things I'll be talking to people about. And of course, you can do lean canvases and you can do lean UX. If you're doing lean UX in particular, a lot of those items on your backlog might actually be experiments.
That's right.
Yeah. So I've picked a marker that doesn't have any color. That wasn't a very good plan. Let me try a different color here. So it could be some of the ones that are purple. There could be a lot of experiments, because some of them could be blended as well, where there's a mixture of experiments and delivery. As such, all I've done here, Matthew, is instead of a product vision, I don't call it a vision. I call it a direction of travel, because we're not really sure we want to get to that place. Actually, we think we want to get to that place, and what I find useful is I use the elevator template for which customers who need what, blah, blah, blah product is a what that does what, unlike what you might think it is, and her competitive advantage is X. So instead of using that, doing that as, as your vision here, what I do is I say, okay, what's our 5+ years almost impossible perfection direction of travel? People are usually the dreamers are usually very good at coming up with this one. And then if you think about it, the 1 to 3 years is going to be a subset of that, isn't it?
Yeah.
So it's going to be smaller, right? And then this one's going to be a subset of that one. And so everybody gets kind of what they're looking for, because people think in different time horizons, and some people think like, what am I doing in the next few weeks? And some people are thinking, well, what am I going to do in the next year? And other people are thinking, well, what am I going to do in the long run? And so by doing it this way, all we're doing, Matthew, is kind of giving you a target, but we know that target will evolve. It's just a direction of travel. The direction will change if we have to do some kind of a pivot.
Yeah, it makes sense. It's just that 1 to 4 weeks was missing earlier.
Yeah. Thank you. Cool. Okay, thank you, Matthew. All right. I put the two of you in by mistake, so I'll just leave you relax for a moment, have a cup of tea or something like that. So this is a diagram of Kanban for complexity. So I've already explained that you've got the direction of travel here. It's heavily oriented on the Kanban sense-making framework. It's not assuming, by the way, that you are in the complex domain. It also gives some guidance in terms of what you should be doing in the chaotic domain, what should you be doing in the complicated domain. I'll probably in the next version, I'll probably talk more about what you should be doing if you're in the apparatic piece, if it's just apparatic where you need to reflect, or if it's confusion. I'll probably talk about that in the next release. But essentially, we're really latching onto the Kanban sense-making framework. You will have a workflow, just like you have in Kanban, the flow strategy. The thing is that there will be events, because if you want Kanban to work in the complex space, you might need to redesign your workflow every day. It might be that chaotic, actually, that you might need to do that. I used the wrong word, chaotic, but there might be so much change going on, so much learning going on, that you might need to redesign your workflow quite frequently. But primarily what we need is some kind of enabling constraint in a rhythmic cycle, 1 to 4 week cycle, so that you can learn quickly. There's no pressure on you to deliver something at the end of this time box. We just look at where things are. We look at the charts and we reflect. So there's still a review. There's a rhythmic cycle review, and there's a rhythmic cycle retrospective. So very similar to what you see in Scrum. We'll just be very clear here. I borrowed from Michael Kuster's, because he did a great blog post last year about doing a Steve Jobs style sprint review. So I actually have very clear guidance in the guide where please do not have boring presentations with spreadsheets or text you can hardly read on a slide. Please don't do that. Please send that out as pre-read, and then try to have a really engaging conversation around the product or service that you're working on. So you can make business decisions with your customers and users and stakeholders about what you're going to do next, and are there going to be any new ideas coming into your backlog that maybe might be selected next, or as soon as you've got capacity. There's a retrospective, which is a good idea for any team that's learning, I think. There's a daily Kanban. So every day there's the daily Kanban. The questions are different, and you can use the Ask Kanban questions from huge.io. If you go to their website, huge.io, there's some cards there where you can ask different types of coaching questions every day or every few days. Like, for example, what are you finishing today? What are we finishing today? Very interesting question. Not what are we starting? What are we finishing today? So it really does change everything. There's still a service level expectation. So as such, you've got a 1 to 4 week rhythmic cycle. There's a review at the end, there's a retro at the end, there's a daily meeting every day with more of a Kanban focus. But replenishment is optional, because you might be replenishing on a daily basis. You might not need, for example, in Scrum, for example, you'd agree a sprint goal, you'd select some backlog items to deliver the sprint goal, and you deliver them during the sprint. Here, actually, this continuous flow, you can have replenishment as an optional event. You can have it if you want to. But what normally happens is teams will decide to bring something in when the system tells them that they need to bring something in. And particularly if you use TameFlow, there's a calculation that happens where you can actually, the system will actually tell you when you need to bring a new item into the system so you don't hurt flow. So there's daily Kanban, there's a review, there's a retro, optional replenishment, no product owner, no Scrum Master, it's just team and servant. So far, this has been tested in banking. I wrote banking twice by mistake. Telecoms, natural sciences, oil and gas, and marketing. I don't want to be pretending that it can work in every area. It's been designed for knowledge work. It wasn't actually designed for software. I guess it could be used for software, but I think we already have an answer with Scrum, don't we, for software and XP and so on. But if you have a situation where maybe your team isn't really bought into Scrum for whatever reason, the last thing we'd want is people to fake Scrum, then this is something that maybe you could look at as well. Another key thing as well is we want to respect no. So if people actually don't want to do this, we'd rather they didn't do it. So if you find this too complicated, just go back to the basic guide to Kanban the flow strategy and just see how you get on. But we don't really want people doing something when actually they don't want to do it. So I'm going to check in now on the comments, and going to check in with Carmen. Any questions on Kanban for complexity? Carmen.
I was just wondering if you had a complex problem.
Yeah.
Until you define what the problem is, and you could move it into more of a complicated problem. So yeah, more in the complicated space. How would you use, because obviously you cannot start building something until you understand what you need to build. How will you work? You still can use this Kanban process?
So I'm trying to reframe your question. So you're saying, if you don't understand what you need to build, how do you manage in the complex space? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, because in a complex space, that would be the case at the beginning.
Yeah.
You cannot start building something. I mean, you could do prototypes and, things that, not necessarily things that you want to throw away because it's just a learning exercise.
Yeah. I know what you mean. So I'm going to go to some content that I showed people 2 weeks ago. So I just have to do I do have to do a noisy move of paper now. Apologies for this. I think it's actually fairly near. So let me just try and find it on my flip chart here, and then I'll go straight to it, Carmen. Thank you. It's a good point. And it ties into something. I was actually talking a few weeks ago about a thing called Scrum at UX. And at the bottom of it, I had a Kanban board. We're not going to talk about Scrum at UX, but I did have an example of a workflow there where people were doing discovery and they wanted to understand what the right thing was to do. So just going to pull that up for you. I have it here now. So if you want to know more about Scrum at UX, I did 2 live streams on this. One of them was with Joshua Seiden, and there's one with Joshua again on the 28th of April. So if you haven't signed up, please do. He got very good feedback the last time he was with me. So just ignore this because this is about Scrum at UX. But down here, what I have at the bottom, hopefully you can see it, Carmen. I've got, let me just push it up a bit so you can see it a bit better. So I've got a simple workflow here where you got product backlog, you've got some discovery, and here in discovery you can see there's 9 items, but in delivery there's 3. That's a really simple workflow. And so the question that I put to people was, should this item here go into delivery? So do you think, Carmen, that when you have an item in discovery and you've done some research on it, do you think it should automatically go into delivery?
Because in this case, I have been using, I think somewhere, because I was in that event with Joe as well.
Yeah.
And someone comment on dual track. So I have been using dual track for this, where we don't start moving things. We are in this discovery track, and we go until we have an element of, okay, yeah, we are quite confident now on this.
Yeah.
This start moving. So we have two backlogs that are different. We have the discovery track backlog and the delivery track backlog. And then when we start feeling that something is enough evidence now, we can start moving things into the backlogs.
Yeah, I don't recommend dual backlog, and I'm not going to cover it now because we're out of time. But there's lots of reasons why we try to keep the backlog the same, because it leads to silos and all sorts of kind of funny stuff. So we try to avoid that if we can. I'll talk about that more. But here specifically, in this particular case, when you do discovery, what a lot of people forget about is they should, they're building evidence. So maybe when we've done the experiments on this, we've discovered, you know what, we should never build this. One of the whole points about doing UX is that we do prototypes, we do tests with customers, they give us feedback, and sometimes we find out, you know, we should never even start with the bloody thing. It's just a really bad idea. We shouldn't do it. We thought it was a great idea, but actually when we went to the market, it was a really bad idea. So there's lots of experts on this as well. There's a thing called Discovery Kanban, Customer Kanban from Patrick Stair, so check him out as well. He does a lot of work in this space. I'll probably do another live stream on Lean UX with Kanban, because I think it's a topic for another day. But essentially what happens is, even if you're using dual track, the expectation is that the teams will have some UX work on their backlog, some blended items. The teams are all working together, but what we do is we use Kanban to help them to manage the time horizons. Because some work was done, and actually we need to confirm that we even got the value. There's other work that we're actually building, and there's other work that we're just checking, should we even build it? So I think your question is more about workflow design. What kind of workflow design would be appropriate for your kind of work? And I'd be happy to do a session on that if people are interested. If there's demand, if people say they'd love to do Kanban workflow design, be happy to do some experimentation with that on a live stream someday if you'd like to do that. Did that address your question, Carmen?
Yeah,
thank you. There's another piece of paper I was looking for, but of course I can't find it now, and I'm looking for. I'll probably find it as soon as. I found it now. That's funny. So this is the true curve that I was talking about earlier. I talked about this in the Lean UX, one of the Lean UX live streams. And so if you don't show something to a customer, if you don't even talk to the customer, you're just in fantasy land, right? And then, so you have a chat with the customer, maybe then you do some paper prototype, you do some advertising for a product that doesn't even exist. Maybe you've got a button to nowhere to check if they've even come in. You do a landing page to see will they come to the page, or maybe they complete a task. Like for example, was it the Zappos guy? When he wanted to figure out would people even buy shoes online, he put up some website, and he just wanted to see would people order shoes online, because he wasn't sure, because people have odd shoe size. I have very odd feet, for example, and I probably wouldn't buy them online. But he wanted to check would people buy them online, and people did. So what he did was he went down to the store on the high street to buy the shoes, packed them up, and then sent them off by FedEx or whatever. And so with very little effort, he proved that people would do things online. And then you could do prototyping where it's not really working, looks like it's working. Maybe do some pre-sales, maybe some concierge service. Or this is a nice one, Wizard of Oz. I think they did this with Amazon Echo. They had a guy in another room, and essentially you say, what's it? Alexa, do this. I'm not used to using it, but Alexa, blah 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 blah. What's the answer? And so a guy next door would actually go into Google or whatever search engine and find the results, and then would talk back like Alexa. It was probably a female, actually, if it was Alexa. So what they did was, before they built any product, they just figured out would people even bother using this, and then you build the product. So what you do with Lean UX is the left-hand side of the curve is more about would people buy not would people buy, but is there a product here? Is there some interesting product here? And then the right-hand side is more about, can we build a business on based on this? And so I would argue that you need to have a fairly nuanced workflow. If your world is Lean UX, I think you need to have a fairly nuanced Kanban workflow, so that, you know what, not everything that comes through here goes to here. While a lot of people do with UX, they think it's UI, and everything goes right through to development. And actually, what I say to people is, I think Lean UX is a great leadership thing, because actually what leaders can learn is there's some stuff they should never even bloody build it, because we found out here when we did Wizard of Oz that they thought it was crap. So why are we building it then? Don't bother building it. So I think there's a bigger conversation. I'm happy to talk about that another day, Carmen. It's probably a whole topic in itself.
I agree. I have exactly the same. So
yeah.
This is, I work for bigger companies. I actually work for big corporates.
Yeah.
And problem is that we do a little bit of prototyping that we manage. Yeah. It is really hard to do all of this that they don't understand MVPs, they release and learn when they release, which is really dangerous for a corporation with a brand as well. So you should be doing things before, and that's always been our battle in this. Manage with prototypes, that at least we can do.
Yeah, I get really worried, particularly in projects. But there was a guy on the Lean UX call, one of the Lean UX calls, and I won't say he felt sorry, because he was a very capable guy. I don't nothing to feel sorry about, but I felt for him, because people were doing a project saying, we're going to do this, but you might find out here you should never do it. You should do something different. But no, we said we do this. So they just deliver it. And so, but thankfully, a lot of people who come to the Scrum UX workshop with me, they change their ways, and I think there'll be probably a Kanban UX offering as well at some point. And what I encourage people to do is to use Lean UX, not just for doing prototyping, not just to kind of develop and understand the customer, but also to stop clogging the funnel, because a lot of companies really struggle to limit work in progress. And one really simple way of limiting work in progress is don't build something you shouldn't even build, because the evidence is telling you the market doesn't want it, or they want it, but they're not willing to pay for it. So there's no business there.
I agree. And on top of it, it's like when you do this Lean UX process, what you learn is not only you learn this won't work, it's like you have already an idea of what could work. So definitely it's an education for the people running, or the leaders running this kind of thing, to move it more at a real Lean UX. But I agree with you, definitely.
Indeed. Yeah. Thank you very much, though. I'm going to switch back now to the other camera, and just so people can see me, and I'll just check him as well. So Daniel Dyron is on. Thank you so much. A lovely comment. Someone loves me. At least I'm not being told I'm being hated. Not yet, anyway. So thank you very much for that comment. And yes, your test is working. It's all good. You're all good. Thank you so much for plugging in. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just flick my camera back now so you can see me again. So we can have a better conversation. And I want to check in now with Matthew to see how Matthew is doing as well. And if anybody else would like to be on the StreamYard, to actually come on camera, you can click on that link. There's also put another invitation out as well, so that you can actually just join me. Just click on the link. Just get your equipment ready, and you can just come straight on. So I'm just going to add that into the comments one now. So thank you so much for that. Okay, so just add it onto the comments window, so hopefully you can see that. So Matthew, I'm going to check in with you now. So how are you feeling?
I'm all right, Jeremy. I thought you'd see my face today.
You're looking good, man. You're looking good.
Oh, thanks. I've got two questions very quick. I think we've run out of time, but I should.
Yeah, okay. Yeah.
I like the idea of the servant. Do they somehow also represent the notion or the function of the customer?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. In practice, the servant is usually the closest you might get to a product owner.
Okay.
But I don't want to burden them with that kind of stuff. I don't want them writing backlog items and all this kind of rubbish that happens a lot of the time when people do Scrum badly. So I want the team to be on the hook for all of that stuff. But they just need clear guidance, and they need somebody to kind of give them proper direction and fix problems that are in their way.
Okay, thanks. And the second one is when you call it a rhythmic cycle.
Yeah.
Is that equivalent to a cadence? Once you've chosen one cycle, is it set, or you can sort of be flexible?
It's like a Scrum sprint in a way. Once you set it as like 3 weeks, you stick it 3 weeks unless you find some reason why you can bring it back into 2 weeks. Yeah. It is decoupled from delivery. So you don't have to have an increment or anything like that at the end of the sprint. Although I hope that you do have something to look at, because otherwise you've nothing to talk about. But maybe you're talking about something that you started 3 months ago. You know, if your cycle time was 3 months long, for example. But usually when teams implement Kanban for complexity, their cycle time comes down. It comes way, way down. The first team that I did it with, their initial cycle time was 120 days, went down to 16 days. 85th percentile, 16 days. So they could have switched to Scrum actually if they wanted to, but they were so happy with Kanban, they just stuck with that.
So here's the catch, and I think Carmen was sort of alluding to it, but didn't quite nail it.
Yeah.
Once you get to this experimental hypothesis phase where we stick to this, I love this, by the way, can you then move it down to Kanban, the flow strategy? Once
yes.
Excellent.
Absolutely. Yeah, okay. Absolutely. Right. Yeah. And then you're back to having optional sprints. You don't need to have all that jargon that you have. You're in the complicated space, so you just continuous flow, right?
We love you.
I think. That's the second person to say it today. I must be doing okay today, right? Good stuff. Matthew, thank you so much. I know you're running out of time, and thank you so much. And I'm going to check in with everybody else as well. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Cheers.
Thank you. Cheers. Bye-bye. Okay, so I'm going to wrap up shortly. I just want to check in. Does anybody have any comments or questions? There's about a 20-second delay from the time something leaves my lips and you hear it in your ears, but so I'll wait maybe 40 seconds to a minute, just see does anybody else have any comments or questions. I'm going to watch the comments window here or see if anybody else joins as well. Thank goodness it's Friday, that's all I can say. Although it feels like every day is a Friday now. And very pleased with the level of engagement of the people who are turning up. So appreciate that. I want to say thank you to Matthew and to Carmen for coming on live. Really, really appreciate that. Thank you for all the people who commented, including Daniel Dairon. Thank you so much. And I think we are done because I don't see any more comments on the stream. So I want to wish you all a lovely weekend. Please keep safe and keep out of harm's way. And I'll dream up of some other topics. I'm probably going to try and invite other people in now to help you as well on the stream, maybe talk about some other topics. So if there are any topics that you'd love to be discussed on a live stream, just let me know what they are. Just reach out to me on the meetup group or just email me, john@ace.works, ace.works. And I'll try to arrange someone to come on. Thank you so much for your time and have a lovely weekend. Keep safe. Over and out. Bye-bye.